All right. All right. All right. All right. So, good morning, everyone. Here we go. My name is Link Brown. Welcome to the Get Global podcast. It's not even a podcast; it's a live stream. So we're live this morning. So welcome everybody. I'm actually on location this morning in the United States. So it is 5:30 in the morning. So, but it's gorgeous. It's still dark outside, but it's nice. So anyway, Link Brown. Welcome to part 3 of our exploring cultural differences this morning. Francisca.
Hello, everyone who is joining us once again in this live stream, and also hello to everyone who is new here. My name is Francisca. I'm founder of Mercerex, where I provide coaching and team communications, and I'm actually here in Switzerland. And Link, although it's almost lunchtime, it's also still dark outside.
Oh, fair enough. So I guess that's the time of year right now.
Yeah.
Uh, Very cool. Yeah, I didn't even say what I do. So actually, I help Swiss SMEs grow and accelerate their business in America. But you'll learn that later. Anyway, it doesn't. That's not the point. Today, this is part 3 of our live stream. We've had a really great conversation the last couple of sessions. The first time we talked about reliability, then we talked about quality and the differences between cultures, and today we're going to talk about humility and being understated. And this is something that's very interesting to me because when I first I consider myself to be a relatively a person who's like pretty much self-aware for in a lot of things. But I remember, so I always knew when I wanted to sell to Swiss SMEs or Swiss businesses, I needed to be come across a little less American, I would say. Bring it down a little bit, be a little bit more humble, be a little bit more understated. And I remember I was talking to one of my friends who's big in the Swiss business world, and I just asked him for some coaching and advice, and he said, "Oh, you need to bring it down even more." And I was like, "What?" Like I hit this crisis point, right, where I really started to think about it. I was saying, "Wait, how can I be humble, but at the same time still be confident?" And it really kind of struck me because I wasn't quite sure like how to handle it. And so like and through this process, I've really been learning a lot about what that means. So I wanted to kind of start that as the point of the conversation of saying, what does confidence actually look like in Switzerland versus in America? So maybe Francisca, maybe you have a couple of things to say about that.
Yeah, that's very nice. Your story you told, Link. So I feel from what you just said, confidence in Switzerland is quite different to the US.
Mm,
So confidence means not necessarily that somebody isn't humble.
mm,
I would say confidence is being assertive, daring to say something, or maybe even dare to ask a question in public or on a webinar or on a live stream. Because yeah, we very often encounter this that in the Swiss society, let's say, people struggle with asking, at least with asking the first question, and it's seen as confidence when you do. So
mhm,
summarizing this, maybe it's expose yourself to a larger crowd means confidence. Being knowledgeable, also express yourself openly, um, but in a bit a quiet manner. I think it's a very thin line, because being overconfident could also be interpreted as arrogant. So
mhm.
this thin line is really challenging.
And how do you know you've actually crossed that line into arrogance?
Yeah, let's define that a little bit more. in terms of when somebody talks a lot with, I have done this, I have done that, or we are the best, we do this and that, and have you seen what we are done? So a lot of this blah blah. Um, that's definitely arrogance, but probably that's more obvious.
Mm.
Or that's pretty obvious also, that this can come across arrogant. It could be that too visionary ideas, not really practical. So this could be seen as unrealistic slash arrogant, because how this person thinks even they can do that, because that's just a vision. Then maybe people that are very loud and extroverted. So I want to clarify, it doesn't mean that extroverted and loud people are arrogant, but they can come across arrogant.
Mm.
That's why I say it's a very thin line. Um, Definitely displaying lots of titles and achievements
Oh.
could be seen as arrogant. Maybe how would you define in the US confidence?
Well, the first thing that comes to mind is that I think this whole conversation, Americans are basically set up to be seen as arrogant by the Swiss because we always use lots of I's and we's and talk about our accomplishments because we have to distinguish ourselves from other people. That's kind of how things are supposed to, in our minds, how things are supposed to work. We're surely visionary people, right? Like I'm always thinking about the future. I'm always selling on the future. And this was actually really a thing that I learned. Selling to Swiss SMEs is, I would come in and talk about what things could look like in 5, 10 years, or when they doubled or tripled their business. And they're like, we don't care about that. We care about like, what are you going to do today? What are you going to do like right now? Right. And um, they they really weren't buying it, right? So it was very visionary. And even though I had the practical steps laid out, it was just like I would still, I, even mentioning too much that future and what that was going to look like, that just came across wrong. And loud, were surely loud people. It's funny, when I moved to Europe, a couple years after I got there, I had my American team. They would come and visit, and I remember I would be down the hallway and I would hear them, and I go, "Oh my God, they're loud. They're giving me a headache." And I would ask my colleagues, I would say, "Is this me? Like, do I do this?" Like, I'm just thinking like, oh, and it's again, they weren't arrogant or whatever. It's just America. America is a very loud place. I always tell people it's a very noisy place, right? And so I think, man, we're set up, just that gives us enough room for this like cultural gap that we might have a problem. If I would think about like what is confidence, though, confidence can look in many different ways. There are a lot of people, like you were saying, who are extremely who are confident, even though they're very understated in the way that they come across. They just exude some sort of like, I don't know, presence that you just know if they say something, it's going to matter. That they really are confident in who they are. It's kind of like if they're a martial artist or something, right? Like who's a double black belt in something, right? Like they're very people who seem very understated, but if you mess with them, like it's going to be a problem for you, right? So, but also in America, all those things you mentioned, talking about your accomplishments, talking about your vision and what you want, talking about having energy, those are seen as confident too. And so you'll see a lot of that in the business world. There's a saying that you can overcome anything that you want with the right amount of energy. And so people will just throw energy into it in America. And I go, it's not going to play well. It's not going to play well when it comes to Swiss culture and European culture in general. But yeah, so that's kind of what American. It can look all types of ways, but one thing for sure is it definitely looks in lots of ways that seem very arrogant to Swiss people. Um, but for you, so then, how would you then define humility? What does that look
Yeah,
like? for you?
Humility, as I mentioned previously, is being humble, but does not mean that someone is not confident. Really, that's very the trick here.
Hmm.
Humble does also not mean shy or timid. It's more like almost a matter of fact.
Mm,
Being humble would mean um, being confident in a more quiet manner,
mm,
like a certain assertiveness or clarity on getting to the point. So maybe to describe this a little bit more tangible for our audience, because I understand myself this is very difficult to describe this feeling, is I come up with some examples like giving credit and acknowledgement to others, although you made a remarkable part yourself. So not taking this for yourself, but more giving it over to others. And I do not mean this like very often scenes, yeah, and by the way, without my team I couldn't have done it. No, really like stepping back and putting others in front of you.
mm,
So in generally being modest about own achievements and in interactions with others. Then, for example, a more practical example on this is like, I'm going by bike or I'm going by public transport to the office, although I actually could easily afford a driver. So you
mm,
see this big gap, but I'm not taking this in this advantage. I'm just doing like everyone else. Um, or yeah, and that's sometimes a bit critical. In job interviews, you normally undersell, understate, because that's seen as humble and a value, and often this can be negative in some areas when you apply for a job, because actually if you apply for a job, it's really good if you at least tell what you can do and not downgrade you. So that's maybe a watch out. Doing jobs that are really like or things that are really beneath your status or your level, like I'm the boss of a huge company or I'm the managing director of a corporate, but I still empty the dishwasher like everybody else, or I still get the broom if somebody dropped the glass and I clean it. It's maybe
mhm,
not expected, but then that's really seen as being humble. um, it has to do also with a certain authenticity.
mm,
For example, if we would link it to I think Switzerland's favorite, Roger Federer. He definitely has everything. He travels a lot. I mean, that's not a lot of being. He is maybe not immediately seen generally as understated or humble, but still
mhm,
we get the feeling that he is humble
mm,
because of his authenticity, his tears, his being real,
mm,
and kind of at least appearing as living through the Swiss values.
mhm,
So yeah, I think this gives a description on what we see in Switzerland or what we feel as being humble. So maybe you you can tell us a little bit more about how this is in the US, and do we have some similarities, or is it also really different, like the confident part?
N- No, actually, I think, thank you for that, because I think actually humility looks very similar in the US, right? I think the problem is it's just clouded with the loudness and the visionary thing. So like that's where kind of the difference becomes. But yeah, I feel like a lot of the values around humility look very, very similar. One of the things that I think I would use as my example is one of my mentors, who this is maybe 2014. First of all, he's my mentor ever since I first started my career. He really, he's been the CEO of multiple, Fortune 500 companies. He's a very wealthy guy, and lived not very far from me. And I remember like I said, 25 years ago, like I was telling him, we were just having a conversation. I was telling him, I think I was rearranging something in my house. And he's like, "Oh, I'll come and help." And I'm like, "Okay, like you're 30 years older than me." Like, I didn't want to say that, but I was like, let's, like, why do you want to help? But he obviously he's a fit guy. And I was just like, okay, well, cool. Yeah, come on over. It'll be great to spend time. And he comes over. And first he comes over in his 25-year-old, it was called a Saturn. I don't even know if people know what kind of car that is, but it was so old. And I remember looking at it and see, like, that's not the humble part, because anybody can, come in something like be, at least put the image out that, you have less than you do. Right. The humble part for me was really that he took his time, and he helped me move these things around. He, and he helped me do all these things when there was really no benefit for himself. Really, there was nothing that he really got out of it other than the satisfaction of helping me. And I think that's kind of what humility looks like to me. And it kind of just goes back to your point of, right, of like doing things that aren't that aren't in your job description. Really being a team player, like you said, um, not just saying that, "Oh, thank you to my team, couldn't have done it without you." No, but it's actually giving people more credit, even more credit than they deserve, right?
Mhm.
To knowing that you could have taken it for yourself. So I think that's kind of looking in terms of humility. I really find a lot of similarities, and the only thing is we just have to really just bridge the gap. And if I were to think about, like, how do we do that from an American perspective, I would say that it's very important. I always talk about this, is just slow down, maybe bring it down a little bit in terms of the volume level, when we talk, or a lot of it. If you think it's quiet as an American, it's probably right when you're talking to Swiss people. Um, speaking in very practical terms, as I was saying, I've just really learned through my process of selling to Swiss businesses is like I have to give them some level of vision. They have to know where they can go, but I really have to spend 95% of my energy on the very practical next steps. Very fact-based, not inspirational. They're already inspired inside of themselves. It's like just give them the next steps so that they can clearly see how you're going to move them from A to B and from B to C. And I think this is true also, in both cultures, is just appreciating others, and noticing others. Like that's a great trait, for for Swiss culture, but also for American culture as well.
Mm.
I don't know, what would you say?
Absolutely, and a great example you brought from your mentor. I really love it. So I think from a Swiss perspective, like from what I hear from you, is it should be um, yeah, we should be more outgoing. Try at least to be more outgoing, and also avoid stereotyping and
Mm,
having too much assumption about somebody being allowed. Then, as for Swiss, interacting with people in the US, probably not be too understated and selling yourself better.
mhm,
Then, not getting offended with direct communication. I think
mm,
that's a very important part as well to bridge the gap. And last but not least, I think really don't see humility and understatement as a weak part. Take it serious. It's a cultural value in Switzerland.
yeah. Yeah, I love that, and I really think it is a cultural value, and I actually think it's a very much a cultural value in the States as well.
Mm.
People know when you're humble. People can feel that and there's actually a sincerity that comes from that when you're humble. So, by the way, I don't. So, any questions you guys can ask them. We do definitely have a shout out to Francisca earlier. We want to. By the way, we want to make this fun, but in 2 weeks, November 9th, we have our next live stream, which is going to be really where we're going to, kind of, we've talked about humility, and in humility, and I was talking about, this whole idea of taking the next steps, A to B and B to C. In 2 weeks, we're going to talk about being pragmatic. And um, yeah, we'll see. We'll see how that goes. This there's definitely going to be some different ways that the cultures work. But we thank you everybody for being on this live stream. It's been a lot of fun. Like I said, 2 weeks. That's going to be part 4. Francisca, any parting words?
Yeah, thanks everyone, and we are looking very much forward to seeing or hearing people again in 2 weeks. And please send us your questions if you have some. We are happy to, or your points. We are really glad and happy to discuss those.
Absolutely. Hey, it's been a blast as always. Thanks everybody for joining, and we'll see you in 2 weeks, November 9th. Take care.
Bye.